The station above the desert planet was alive with lights and voices. But to Zira it felt empty. She stood at the edge of the landing bay, holding a small silver emblem in her hand, the last thing she had from her late husband. Around her, alien captains, traders, and pilots walked past without a glance, some whispering to each other, some turning their heads away in disgust. She had become a shadow among them, unwanted, rejected, cursed. Zira's people had once respected her husband, a brave commander who died under strange circumstances. But since his death, they looked at her as if she carried his doom. No ship would take her, no crew would trust her, and no world would welcome her. They said she carried misfortune. They said anyone who stood near her would fall into ruin. For months she begged for passage away from this cold station, and for months she heard only one answer: no. Now she stood there again, watching the last transport ships leave one after another. The heavy rumble of engines shook the air, each sound reminding her she was left behind once more. Above the station, a storm was forming, a belt of glowing meteors breaking apart in space. The warning sirens echoed, telling all ships to prepare for sudden impact. Pilots rushed to take off, leaving the station before the storm could strike. But Zira had nowhere to go. Her eyes burned with shame as she pressed the emblem to her chest. "Why am I still here?" she whispered, her voice trembling. She thought of her husband's promise that even in death she would never be alone. But now, surrounded by thousands of travelers, she felt more alone than ever. The first fragments of the meteor storm scraped across the sky, their fire lighting the glass dome of the station. Crowds ran, alarms screamed, and the landing bay emptied. Zira stood still, silent as stone, ready to accept her fate. Perhaps this was how it was meant to end. Perhaps no one was meant to take her away. And then she heard a sound, a different sound. It was not the roar of a heavy warship, nor the smooth hum of an alien cruiser. It was rough, uneven, almost clumsy. A small, shabby human cargo ship descended into the bay, its engines coughing as if it had survived many battles already. The paint was scraped, the panels dented, but it landed steady and sure. The bay lights flickered across the words scratched on its side: "The Wayfarer." The ramp lowered with a hiss, and from the shadows stepped a tall figure in a worn jacket. His hair was dark, his eyes sharp, and his face carried no fear when it turned toward Zira, unlike the aliens who had passed her by. This man did not look away. He looked directly at her, as if he had been searching for her all along. The other captains shouted warnings. "Do not take her," one alien barked. "She is cursed," cried another. But the human did not answer them. He only walked closer, his boots striking the metal floor with calm rhythm. Zira stepped back, unsure if this was another cruel trick. Her heart pounded as he stopped in front of her. For the first time in months, someone truly saw her. He studied her face. Then his gaze dropped to the silver emblem in her hand. "You're waiting for a ship," he said simply, his voice low but steady. She nodded slowly, not trusting her words. "Everyone else turned you away," he added. Again she nodded, her throat tight. "And yet, you're still standing here," he said, almost as if it impressed him. The station trembled as another meteor slammed into the outer shields. The air grew hot. Dust fell from the ceiling. And yet the human remained calm. Finally, he extended his hand toward her. "My name is Daniel," he said. "I have a ship." "And I don't believe in curses," Zira froze. No alien had ever spoken to her like that since her husband's death. His eyes were not filled with pity, or disgust, or fear. They carried something else, something she had nearly forgotten. Trust. Her voice shook as she whispered. Why would you help me?" Daniel's expression softened, though danger shook the station walls. "Because no one else would," he answered, "and sometimes, that is reason enough." The meteors struck harder now, explosions echoing across the station. The warning sirens turned into screams, calling all remaining ships to leave. Daniel did not look at the chaos. His hand still reached out. Steady and sure, Zira looked at it, her mind racing between fear and hope. If she took his hand, she would leave behind everything she knew. If she refused, she might never leave this cursed place. She closed her eyes, breathed once, and placed her hand in his. In that moment, the alarms, the shouts, the fire of the storm all seemed to fade. One human, one alien widow, standing together at the edge of fate. The others shouted warnings, calling him foolish, reckless, doomed. But Daniel only tightened his grip, leading her toward the ship. For the first time since her husband's death, Zira felt something different inside her. Not fear, not despair, but the faint spark of hope. And as the ship's engines roared to life, carrying them both into the storm, the Widow of Stars realized her story was only beginning. The ship rattled as it broke through the storm, fiery meteors flashing past like arrows of light. Inside the Wayfarer, Zira sat quietly, her hands folded tightly around the silver emblem. Daniel, the human captain, moved between the controls, his eyes sharp, hands steady, as if chaos outside meant nothing to him. To her surprise, he whistled softly while dodging falling rocks the size of towers. He flew like a man who had done this 1,000 times before. The crew, however, was not as calm. 3 figures stood behind Zira, glaring at her with fear and anger. One was a tall insectoid with shining green eyes, another a scaled reptilian, and the last a small wiry woman with pale skin and cold expression. They whispered harshly to Daniel, their voices sharp even over the alarm sounds. "You should not have brought her aboard," hissed the insectoid, his mandibles clicking. "She carries the curse," said the reptilian, tail thrashing nervously. The human woman crossed her arms, her tone colder than the void outside. "Daniel, if she stays, we all die." Zira lowered her gaze, shame burning inside her. She had heard these words before, again and again on every station, on every dock, always the same, always rejection. But Daniel did not answer them yet. He only pushed the ship harder, weaving through the storm. When at last the meteors thinned and the black silence of space returned, he turned in his chair and faced them all. "She is staying," Daniel said simply, his voice firm. The crew erupted in protest, voices overlapping. The reptilian slammed his claw against the wall. "You risk all our lives," the human woman stepped forward. "Why? Tell us why she matters to you." Daniel met their anger with calm. "Because no one else would take her. And I will not leave someone to die when I have room to help." The insectoid leaned closer, eyes glowing. "You think kindness will protect you, human? No, her curse spreads, her presence draws death." Zira flinched at his words, gripping the emblem so tight it cut into her skin. She wanted to speak, to defend herself, but fear chained her tongue. Daniel only leaned back in his chair and looked at them one by one. "You all trust me to guide this ship through storms, through battles, through war zones," he said. "Trust me now, or leave my ship." Silence fell, broken only by the soft hum of the engines. The crew exchanged glances, but no one moved to leave. Finally, they turned away, muttering their displeasure. Daniel gave a small nod as if the matter was closed, but his eyes slid back toward Zira. She felt the weight of his gaze, and for the first time in so long, she did not feel invisible. Hours passed as the ship drifted toward a nearby trade route. Zira sat quietly in the mess hall, the metal table cold under her hands. The crew avoided her, eating at a distance, whispering where they thought she could not hear, but she heard everything. "She will bring hunters to us," the reptilian hissed. "She will end us all," muttered the human woman. Zira closed her eyes, wishing the voices would stop. Daniel entered then, carrying a steaming mug, his boots echoing against the floor. Without hesitation, he sat across from her, sliding the drink toward her. "It's bitter," he said with a small grin, "but it warms the chest." Zira looked at the dark liquid, hesitating. "Why do you do this?" she asked softly. "Why risk your crew for me?" Daniel leaned on the table, his voice quiet but firm. "Because I see more than what others fear." Before she could answer, the ship shuddered. Red lights flashed along the walls, and the voice of the insectoid shouted over the speakers. "Captain, we are being followed." Daniel rose quickly, motioning for Zira to stay. Her heart pounded as she followed him anyway, climbing the ladder to the cockpit. Through the glass, dark shapes moved in the distance. 3 ships, sleek and sharp, alien hunters. They glided like predators in the void, their lights flashing like teeth. The reptilian cursed under his breath. "I knew it. They are after her." Zira's chest tightened, guilt crashing over her. She had brought this danger to them. She stepped forward, her voice shaking. "If I leave, they will stop chasing you." But Daniel shook his head, his jaw tight. "No, they will kill you, and I do not throw people to wolves." He pulled the controls sharply, sending the Wayfarer into a dive between scattered asteroid fragments. The hunter ships followed, their weapons lighting up the dark. Bolts of energy screamed past the hull, shaking the ship. The crew scrambled to their stations, fear and anger mixing in their eyes. Zira gripped the rail, her heart racing. "Why are they after you?" Daniel asked suddenly. His voice sharp, Zira froze, her lips parting, but the words refused to come. She had carried the secret so long it felt like poison on her tongue. Finally, she whispered, "Because of what I carry, because of what my husband left behind." Daniel glanced at her, his eyes narrowing, but before he could question more, another blast struck the ship, throwing sparks across the cockpit. The hunters closed in relentless, and Zira realized the truth she had buried so long could no longer remain hidden. The Wayfarer shook as another blast from the hunters grazed the hull. Sparks rained across the cockpit like falling stars. Daniel's hands moved fast over the controls. His eyes locked on the black horizon. The hunters pressed closer, their sleek ships moving like predators scenting blood. Zira clutched the rail, her heart pounding with guilt and fear. She knew they were after her, and soon Daniel and his crew would pay the price. The reptilian hissed, his tail whipping the floor. "She has doomed us all." The insectoid's mandibles clicked rapidly. "I warned you, human, I warned you." The pale human woman spoke coldly. "Throw her out and they will leave us." Zira lowered her head, unable to meet their burning eyes, but Daniel's voice cut through the chaos, hard as steel. "She stays," he said. "No one is thrown to wolves on my ship." The crew fell silent, though their hatred still lingered like smoke. Daniel pulled the ship into a sharp dive through a field of shattered asteroids. Rocks drifted in the void, glowing faintly from old impacts, jagged as broken glass. The Wayfarer slipped between them, the hunters following close behind. Every move was a gamble. One mistake and they would be crushed by stone or burned by enemy fire. Zira closed her eyes, forcing herself to breathe. The secret she carried was no longer safe. If Daniel was to protect her, he needed to know the truth. She stepped closer, her voice trembling. "They hunt me because of what I carry, because of what my husband found before he died." Daniel didn't look away from the controls, but his voice was sharp. "What is it?" "The memory crystal," she whispered. "It is bound to me, to my heartbeat if I die. It reveals everything he discovered." The crew turned to her in shock. Even the reptilian's anger froze. "What discovery?" Daniel pressed. His voice low, Zira's eyes darkened. "A weapon hidden long ago, powerful enough to burn entire civilizations. My husband died to keep it secret. Now they believe I hold the key." The insectoid recoiled, hissing in fear. "You brought death itself onto this ship." The human woman's voice trembled for the first time. "No wonder they want you, no wonder." But Daniel's jaw tightened, his hand steady on the wheel. "We are not giving you up," he said. "Not to them." The hunters fired again, the blast slamming into the shields. Alarms screamed, the cockpit bathed in red light. The Wayfarer spun, engines straining, panels shaking loose from the ceiling. Daniel's eyes scanned the field of asteroids, searching for salvation. "There," he muttered, pushing the ship hard toward a shadowed cluster of massive rocks. They slipped between them, deeper into darkness, until the hunters' lights grew distant. Finally, Daniel cut the engines to silence, the Wayfarer drifting in the shadow of a giant stone. The crew held their breath, the ship floating like a ghost. Only the faint hum of systems filled the air. The hunters prowled outside, scanning, searching, their beams of light cutting through the void. One beam passed over the Wayfarer, bathing the hull in cold white glare. Zira's chest tightened. Every second felt endless, but the beam moved on, and the hunters drifted farther, believing the ship lost. Silence returned, heavy and tense. The reptilian exhaled sharply. "We will not escape them forever." The insectoid clicked nervously. "They will return, they always return." Zira lowered her head, shame burning her. "I never wished to bring this curse upon you." Daniel turned, his eyes fierce. "This isn't your curse, Zira. This is their fear." The pale human woman narrowed her eyes. "And what will you do when their fear becomes our death?" Daniel stood, his voice steady. "We fight it together." The word struck Zira like a light in the dark. For so long she had been cast aside, treated as poison, but here, this human spoke as though she was worth fighting for. Her heart ached with something she had almost forgotten. Hope. Later, in the dim corridors of the ship, strange things began to happen. Doors sealed on their own, lights flickered. Systems glitched without reason. The reptilian snarled. "Her presence twists the ship," the insectoid hissed. "It is the curse." But Daniel studied the systems with narrowed eyes. "No, this isn't her. Someone is tampering with us." Zira froze, a chill running through her. Could it be true? Someone on board betraying them, sending signals to the hunters. The thought gnawed at her. Her eyes darted to the crew, The reptilian's sharp glare, the insectoid's twitching mandibles, the cold stare of the pale woman. Any of them could be the shadow among them. She hugged the emblem tighter, whispering to herself, "Not again. I cannot lose another crew." The darkness of space pressed close around the wayfarer. Hunters waited somewhere beyond, patient as vultures inside the ship. Fear and distrust grew like cracks in glass. And Zyra knew the true danger was not only outside, but among them, shadows in space, shadows in hearts, and soon, one of those shadows would strike. The wayfarer drifted in the shadow of a broken asteroid, its lights dimmed, its engines silent outside. The hunters circled, patient and cruel, waiting for the ship to reveal itself. Inside, tension grew like a sickness, every crew member watching the others with sharp, mistrusting eyes. Zyra sat alone in the mess hall, her silver emblem cold in her hands. Whispers of blame followed her wherever she walked. The reptilian muttered that she was the reason for their suffering. The insectoid hissed that her curse had already poisoned the ship. Even the pale human woman looked at her as though she carried a knife hidden behind her smile. But Zyra could feel something else. Something darker, the glitches in the ship. The sealed doors, the strange whispers over the comms, these were not curses. They were signs of betrayal. Someone among them was feeding the hunters information, guiding them like a shadow from within. Daniel stood in the cockpit. Eyes scanning the star charts, the crew argued behind him. Their voices sharp, but he ignored them. Only once did he turn and say, "If anyone here thinks fear will save them, they are free to leave when we reach the next port." No one answered, for they all knew the hunters would never let them reach safety. That night cycle, Zyra could not sleep. She wandered the dim corridors, her footsteps echoing softly. The air felt heavy, as though unseen eyes followed her. Turning a corner, she froze. The reptilian stood at a panel, claws tapping quickly over the screen, his eyes darting around as if afraid of being seen. A faint light pulsed from the console. A hidden transmission, Zyra gasped, but in that moment, the reptilian spun, his eyes flashing with fury. "You!" he hissed, slamming the panel shut. "Spying on me." Zyra stepped back, her voice unsteady. "What were you sending?" His claws twitched dangerously. "Lies, nothing, stay away from me." But his voice betrayed him. Too sharp, too defensive before she could answer. Footsteps echoed down the hall, Daniel's voice calling her name. The reptilian vanished into the shadows, leaving only silence behind. When Daniel reached her, Zyra wanted to tell him what she had seen. But doubt chained her words. What if she was wrong? What if Daniel trusted the reptilian more than her? She lowered her head, whispering only, "The shadows feel close." Daniel studied her, his eyes filled with questions, but he said nothing. The next day, the wayfarer was ambushed. The hunters struck from the darkness. Blasting the asteroid cover apart, the ship jolted, alarms screamed. Fire burst from the hull. Daniel shouted commands. The crew rushed to stations, but in the chaos, the betrayer struck. The ship's shields flickered and died without warning. Zyra's heart froze. Someone had shut them down from inside. Hunters closed in, weapons blazing, tearing into the exposed hull. The crew cried out, panic flooding the ship. Daniel gritted his teeth, pulling the wayfarer into a desperate dive. "Find the source," he barked. "Someone killed the shields." Zyra raced with him through the corridors, smoke and sparks falling around them. Doors slammed shut, sealing their path, forcing them into the engineering bay, and there she saw it. The reptilian stood over the console, his claws sunk deep into the controls, his eyes wild. "You fool," he roared at Daniel. "You should have cast her out when you had the chance. Now we will all die because of her." Daniel's hand went to his weapon, his voice low. "Step away from the controls." But the reptilian snarled, his tail lashing. "No, I will end this myself. I will give her to the hunters, and they will spare us." Zyra's chest tightened, her secret burning within her. She cried out, "They will never spare you. They only want the weapon. When I die, they will kill you all anyway." The reptilian's eyes flickered, doubt flashing across his rage. Daniel seized the moment, rushing forward, slamming him back from the console. The two struggled, claws against steel, human strength against reptilian fury. The fight crashed across the room, sparks flying, console shattering. Zyra stood frozen, torn between fear and action. Then she saw it, the reptilian's claw reaching for a hidden knife at his belt. Without thinking, she grabbed a loose pipe from the floor and struck. The reptilian staggered. Daniel slammed him against the wall, the knife clattering to the ground. Breathing hard, Daniel pinned him, his voice sharp. Why? The reptilian hissed through bloodied teeth. Because she is death. Because I will not die for her. Daniel's eyes hardened. You betrayed us, not her. The ship shook violently. Another blast tearing through the hull. The hunters were boarding now, their claws scraping the outer locks. Daniel bound the reptilian quickly, throwing him into a storage cell. Then he turned to Zyra, his breath ragged. No more secrets. What exactly is inside that crystal? Zyra's hands trembled as she held the emblem close. Her voice was quiet, yet it carried the weight of galaxies. My husband found the coordinates to a weapon buried in the dark. A weapon that can erase worlds. It sleeps inside this crystal, tied to my heartbeat as long as I live. It stays locked. Daniel stared at her, his eyes wide but steady. Then the sound of tearing metal filled the air. The hunters were breaking in. Zyra whispered, They will not stop, not until they tear it from me. Daniel's jaw tightened, his hand gripping her shoulder. Then we fight them together, or none of us survive. The lights flickered. The doors buckled, shadows moved in the smoke. The hunters had come, and the wayfarer would face its darkest night. The wayfarer shook like a wounded beast, sparks raining from the ceiling as the hunters clawed at its hull. The alarm screamed, red light flashing across the smoke-filled corridors. Zyra stood in the center of it all, clutching the silver emblem against her chest. Her breath quick and shallow. Daniel faced her, his voice steady though the ship trembled. No more half-truths, Zyra. Tell me everything. Her fingers curled tighter around the emblem, her eyes dark with grief. My husband died to keep this hidden, she whispered, and now it is mine to guard. She lifted the emblem slowly, and the faint blue glow inside pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat. Daniel's crew gathered around, fear and curiosity battling in their eyes. Even the pale human woman, who had spoken against Zyra since the beginning, leaned closer, unable to look away. This crystal, Zyra said, her voice trembling, is not just a memory. It is a living lock. It carries coordinates to something ancient, something terrible, a weapon buried long ago, powerful enough to erase worlds. My husband tied it to me as long as I live. It cannot be opened, but if I die, it will awaken. A silence fell over the crew, heavy as stone. The insectoid clicked nervously, his glowing eyes darting between Zyra and Daniel. You mean, he hissed, if your heart stops, the hunters gain everything, Zyra nodded slowly, shame burning through her. That is why they chase me. Why every alien turns from me. To them I am not a person. I am only the key. Daniel studied her, his gaze sharp but not unkind. And yet, he said, you kept walking, even when they all turned away. Zyra swallowed hard, her voice breaking. I thought I would die forgotten. Daniel shook his head, his voice firm. Not while you were on my ship. Another blast shook the hull, throwing the crew against the walls. The hunters were breaching now, claws tearing at the outer locks, their shadows flickering in the smoke. The reptilian prisoner roared from his cell. Throw her to them, or you will all be ash. Daniel ignored him, his eyes still fixed on Zyra. You said it is tied to your heartbeat, he pressed. Does that mean the crystal responds to you alone? Zyra nodded, the glow pulsing faster in her palm. Yes, it feels my fear, my hope, even my grief. My husband built it that way, because he trusted me more than anyone, but now, I am alone. Daniel stepped closer, placing his hand gently over hers. No, not alone. Not anymore, he said quietly. The warmth of his touch steadied her trembling hands. The glow of the crystal softened as if it, too, listened. The pale woman frowned, her voice sharp. Daniel, you cannot be serious. If we protect her, we become targets for the entire galaxy. But Daniel did not look away from Zyra. He spoke louder, his voice firm. We already are targets, but I will not trade a life for survival, not hers. Not anyone's. The insectoid hissed in frustration. The pale woman cursed under her breath. But none could deny the fire in their captain's eyes for a moment. Zyra felt something she had thought lost forever. Trust. The wall shuddered, sparks exploded, and then the sound of tearing metal filled the corridor. The hunters had broken through, their tall, armored forms stepping out of the smoke, glowing weapons in their claws. Their eyes burned with hunger, locked on Zyra. Give her to us, one growled in a voice like grinding stone. Spare yourselves and live. Daniel drew his weapon, standing between them and Zyra. You'll have to go through me first, he said, his voice calm as iron. The hunters hissed in anger, their weapons raised. The crew scrambled to defend the ship. But the odds were hopeless. They were outnumbered, outgunned and trapped. Zyra felt the crystal pulse wildly in her hands. Brighter, hotter, as if sensing the danger. Her knees buckled. A wave of energy racing through her chest. She gasped, clutching at Daniel's arm. It reacts to danger if I fall. If my heart stops, it will unleash everything. The hunters froze at her words, their eyes widening. For a moment, fear flickered across their monstrous faces. But then one snarled, "Then we will take you alive and bleed you until it opens." Zyra's blood ran cold. Daniel pulled her behind him, his voice sharp. "Over my dead body." The hunters surged forward, the corridor filled with fire and screams. The crew fought desperately, the insectoid slashing with his claws, the pale woman firing her weapon with deadly aim, but still the hunters pressed closer. Each strike pushing them back. Zyra's chest burned, the crystal glowing brighter than ever. Her heartbeat raced wild and uneven, the glow spilling across the walls like blue fire. Daniel looked back at her, his face pale in the light. "Zyra, what is happening?" She shook her head, tears in her eyes. "If my heart fails, it will open. I cannot control it much longer." Daniel's grip tightened on her shoulder, his voice fierce. "Then stay with me, stay alive. I don't care about the weapon, I only care about you." Her breath caught, the words striking deeper than any wound. For the first time, someone saw her not as a curse, not as a key, but as a person. The hunters roared, the battle raged. But inside Zyra, something shifted. The crystal pulsed once, twice, and then steadied. Her heartbeat calmed, not from her own strength, but from Daniel's hand still gripping hers. Unshaken, the glow dimmed. No longer wild, no longer dangerous, it had listened to him. Through her, and in that moment Zyra understood. The key was not just tied to her life, it was tied to her bond, and now, that bond was no longer hers alone. Daniel had become part of it. The hunters closed in, but Zyra stood taller, her eyes no longer filled with fear. For the first time since her husband's death, she was not guarding the secret alone. The key was within her, yes, but now so was Daniel. Together they faced the storm. The Wayfarer limped through the stars, its hull cracked, its shields weak, smoke rising from its wounded engines. Behind them the hunters gave chase, relentless and patient. Daniel pushed the controls with steady hands, his jaw tight, eyes scanning for a place to make their stand. They could not outrun the enemy forever, and Zyra knew it. The crystal in her hands pulsed faintly, as though warning her of the storm yet to come. Ahead stretched a dead world, its surface black and broken, scarred by ancient wars. No cities, no signals, no life, only jagged mountains and seas of ash. Daniel's voice was calm. "We land there if we fight. We fight where no one else can get hurt." The crew exchanged fearful glances. But no one spoke against him. The Wayfarer descended, fire trailing from its wings as it plunged through the thin atmosphere. It crashed hard on the barren ground, metal screaming as the ship tore across the rocks, until finally it slid to a smoking halt. Silence filled the air. Heavy and suffocating, Zyra rose to her feet, her body trembling but her spirit firm. She looked at Daniel, who stood tall despite the blood on his face. "They will come," she whispered. He nodded once, gripping his weapon tighter. "Then let them." The crew prepared quickly, sealing doors, checking weapons, setting traps across the rocky field. The insectoid sharpened his claws against the stone, muttering prayers in his own tongue. The pale woman loaded fresh cells into her rifle, her cold eyes softer now as though she had accepted her fate. Even the reptilian prisoner growled from his cell. "You will all die for her." Daniel ignored him, his voice steady as he addressed the others. "Stay close, watch each other's backs. No one fights alone." The ground trembled. Shadows spread across the sky. The hunters had arrived, their ships landing like dark beasts, claws tearing the earth as armored troops marched out. Their eyes glowed in the dust, weapons crackling with deadly light. They surrounded the wreck of the Wayfarer, their voices echoing across the wasteland. "Give us the key," they roared. "Give us the widow." "And you may yet live." Zyra stood beside Daniel, the crystal glowing faintly in her hands. Her heart pounded, but she did not hide behind him. She raised her chin, her voice trembling yet strong. "I am not your key, I am not your curse. I am more than what you fear." The hunters hissed, their leader stepping forward, taller than the rest, his armor black as night. You are nothing without that crystal, he growled. A lock to be broken, a life to be ended. Daniel stepped between them, his voice calm but sharp. Then break me first, the leader snarled, raising his weapon, and the battle began. The wasteland exploded in light and fire. The Wayfarer's crew fought with desperate fury. Weapons blazing, claws tearing, blades flashing. Daniel moved like a storm, his every shot precise, every step sure. Zyra stayed behind him at first, the crystal clutched in her hands, its glow wild with the rhythm of her fear. But then she felt it. Daniel's hand brushing hers, his voice shouting above the chaos, "Stay alive, Zyra. Stay with me." Her heartbeat steadied, the crystal calmed, its wild glow softening into a controlled light. She raised her voice, a cry that carried across the battlefield. "You will not have me." The hunters faltered for a moment, confused by the strange energy radiating from her. Daniel pressed the attack, driving them back step by step. The insectoid slashed down two at once, roaring in triumph. The pale woman covered their flanks with deadly precision, her cold eyes burning with sudden fire. Even the reptilian, hearing the chaos, slammed his body against the walls of his cell, desperate to escape and join the fight, though for himself alone. But the hunters were endless, wave after wave crashing against them. The ground burned, the air filled with screams. Zyra felt her strength fading, her heartbeat stumbling, the crystal pulsing dangerously. If she collapsed now, everything would be lost. Daniel saw it, his hand gripping her shoulder, his voice firm. "Zyra, listen to me. You are not a curse, you are not just a key. You are more than what they fear. You are what they cannot control." His words struck her like a blade of light. She lifted the crystal high, her voice steady now. "You want the weapon? But it will never be yours." The crystal blazed with sudden power, a shockwave of blue light sweeping across the battlefield. The hunters staggered, their weapons sparking, their eyes filled with fear. The leader roared in rage, forcing his way through the wave, his claws reaching for Zyra. Daniel stood before her, raising his weapon. But it was Zyra who spoke, her voice calm. "You will not take me. Not while I still breathe." The crystal pulsed once, releasing a blast that threw the leader back. His armor cracked, his body broken. The hunters froze, fear finally breaking their endless fury. For the first time they turned, retreating into the smoke, dragging their wounded away. The battlefield fell silent except for the crackle of fire and the rasp of breath. Zyra collapsed to her knees. The crystal dimming in her hands, Daniel caught her, holding her close, his voice soft. "You did it, Zyra. You stood against them." Tears filled her eyes, but her lips curved into the faintest smile. "Not alone, Daniel, never alone." The crew gathered, bruised and bloodied but alive, for now the hunters were driven back. But everyone knew they would return. Still, something had changed. The Widow of Stars was no longer just a hunted key. She was a fighter, and beside her stood the one human who dared to love her first. The battlefield lay quiet, ashes drifting across the broken ground. The hunters were gone, retreating into the black skies, leaving behind only wreckage and silence. The Wayfarer stood wounded but unbroken, smoke rising from its hull like a scarred survivor. And among the ruins, Daniel held Zyra in his arms, her silver emblem glowing faintly between them. She breathed slowly, her chest heavy, her strength nearly gone, but her eyes, once filled with fear, now carried something new. Peace for the first time since her husband's death. She felt no shadow pressing against her heart. Daniel's hand rested over hers, steady and warm, anchoring her in the storm. "You're safe," he whispered, his voice rough with exhaustion. "You're safe because you fought." The crew gathered, battered but alive. The insectoid leaned on his claws, his body trembling, but his eyes glowed with respect. The pale woman wiped blood from her cheek, her cold mask broken, her voice softer. "You stood against them, Zyra, and we stood with you." Even the reptilian prisoner, though bound, stared at her with disbelief, muttering, "You should not have lived." "And yet you did." Zyra forced herself to stand. Daniel helping her to her feet, she looked at each of them, her voice trembling but strong. "I was never meant to survive this. The galaxy wanted me gone. They wanted me to be only a key. But today I was more than that because of you, because of him." Her eyes met Daniel's, and though no words followed, the meaning was clear. The crystal pulsed faintly, its glow soft and calm. No longer wild with danger, Daniel frowned, studying it. "What now? What do we do with this? If the hunters keep coming, they will never stop. Zyra held it tightly, shaking her head. The weapon must never be found. Never. My husband died to keep it hidden, and if it awakens, entire civilizations will fall. Her words carried a weight the crew understood. The insectoid bowed his head. Then we guard it. As he guarded it. But Daniel stepped closer, his eyes steady. Or we end it. So no one ever hunts you again, Zyra froze, her breath catching. End it, she whispered. Do you mean destroy it? Daniel nodded. If the crystal dies, the hunters lose their reason. They cannot chase what no longer exists. Her chest ached at the thought. The emblem was all she had left of her husband. The last piece of his voice, his touch, his memory. Tears welled in her eyes. If I destroy it, I lose him forever. Daniel placed his hand over hers. His voice gentle. You will not lose him, Zyra. You carry him already here. He touched her chest softly, where her heart beat strong. And here, he added, touching her temple, the memory is not in the crystal. It is in you. The crew stood in silence, watching. The pale woman lowered her weapon slowly, her eyes softening further. The insectoid clicked gently, a sound of agreement. Even the reptilian was quiet, as if the truth in Daniel's words had struck deeper than he wanted to admit. Zyra's tears fell, but her hand steadied. She raised the crystal high, its glow flaring in the dying light. Her voice shook but carried across the barren field. You were my bond, my love, my strength. And though you are gone, I will not be chained to your shadow. I will carry you forward free. The crystal pulsed once, twice, then cracked. Light burst outward, filling the sky with a final blaze of blue fire. The sound echoed like 1,000 voices fading into the stars. And then, the crystal was gone, shattered into dust. Carried away on the wind, silence followed. Zyra's hands trembled, empty now, but her heart felt lighter than it had in years. Daniel caught her as she stumbled, his voice soft. You chose freedom not just for yourself, but for the galaxy. She leaned into him, whispering. And for us, the hunters never returned, their purpose erased with the crystal. The galaxy that once feared Zyra would no longer see her as a curse. But whether they accepted her or not no longer mattered. For now, she had something greater. Days later, the wayfarer rose from the dead world, repaired enough to sail once more. Its scars shone in the starlight like marks of honor. The crew worked side by side, their distrust replaced with quiet respect. They had seen the widow stand against shadows, and they had seen a human fight for her when no one else dared. On the bridge, Zyra stood beside Daniel. Watching the stars drift past, her voice was quiet. Do you regret it, bringing me aboard? Risking your ship, your crew? Daniel smiled faintly, his eyes on the endless dark. I regret nothing, Zyra, because sometimes the choice that seems foolish is the one that saves you, and me. She turned to him, her eyes shining. You saw me when no one else would. And I will keep seeing you, he said simply, his voice steady as always. The stars stretched endless before them, 1,000 paths waiting. Zyra felt no chains now, no curse, no shadow. She was no longer only the widow of stars. She was something more, alive, free, chosen. And beside her stood the one who had dared to love her first. Together they sailed into the unknown, not as hunted prey, not as cursed shadows, but as a bond stronger than fear, a love beyond stars.